The heavy wooden doors of the Providence Municipal Court swung open at exactly 10:15 on a Tuesday morning, the rhythmic clicking of designer heels echoing through the polished marble floors. Olivia Hayes, the 22-year-old daughter of a wealthy real estate magnate, walked into the courtroom like it was a boutique, not a place of law. Her Prada sunglasses were perched effortlessly atop her perfectly styled hair, and her Louis Vuitton bag swung casually from her shoulder as she scrolled through her phone, seemingly unaware of the people around her. She didn't glance at the judge. She didn't acknowledge the bailiff. She didn't notice the dozen eyes in the gallery watching with varying degrees of curiosity and sharp disapproval. Olivia, fully absorbed in her digital world, had no idea that the next 10 minutes would irrevocably change her life. She was about to find out that no amount of money, no family name could protect her from the consequences of her actions. Judge Frank Caprio, known for his patience and fairness, had spent the evening reviewing her case. He knew about the 7 previous traffic violations, all quietly erased by her father's expensive lawyers. He had seen Olivia's social media posts mocking the legal system, and he was prepared to teach her a lesson she would never forget. The question was, would Olivia realize that the world she had been living in, where money could solve everything, was about to crash down around her? Olivia Hayes stood before Judge Frank Caprio with all the nonchalance of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Her sunglasses, now resting precariously on the bridge of her nose, were the last of her remaining attempts at maintaining an air of superiority in the face of the law. She slowly set her phone down on the podium, its screen still glowing with the latest notifications, as though she could simply tune out everything happening around her. The charge on the court docket seemed simple enough: reckless driving clocked at 80 mph in a 35-mile-per-hour residential zone. An expired vehicle registration, which she had completely forgotten to renew, because according to her, she delegated such mundane tasks to the staff. And most tellingly, her refusal to sign the citation after being stopped by the police, something that stood out in the officer's report as particularly infuriating. Olivia had called her father the moment she was pulled over, ignoring the officer's instructions and making it clear that she was too busy for such petty matters. She even told the officer that her father was Charles Hayes, that they had a team of lawyers on retainer, and that he was wasting her time by pulling her over. But what elevated this case from a simple traffic violation to something far more serious was the officer's report. Officer Mark Allen had described in detail the reckless nature of Olivia's driving, noting that she had sped within a mere 3 feet of a 9-year-old boy riding his bicycle home from school. The boy had barely managed to swerve out of the way, an action that likely saved him from serious injury or worse. When the officer informed Olivia about how close she had come to potentially causing a tragedy, her response was chilling. She had brushed it off with a remark that it wasn't her fault the child was in the street instead of the sidewalk, and that parents should better manage their children. Even as the officer tried to explain the seriousness of the situation, Olivia interrupted, stating that she was late for a photo shoot and had more important things to do than deal with the inconvenience of the ticket. The officer's words carried weight not just because of the violation itself, but because they painted a picture of someone who lived with an overwhelming sense of entitlement. Olivia didn't seem to care that her actions had endangered a child's life. She didn't even seem to care about the law. She only cared about getting out of the situation as quickly as possible, and she was confident that money power and her father's connections would make it all disappear. After all, that was how the world had always worked for her. As she stood there still scrolling through her phone, Olivia's attitude was clear. She was above it all. This was just another minor inconvenience for her, another situation that she expected to be solved with a quick phone call. She didn't acknowledge the gravity of the situation or the people around her. It was as though she believed the courtroom itself was just another backdrop for her personal drama, a place to kill time before she returned to her life of luxury. Judge Caprio, however, was a man who had spent over 30 years on the bench, presiding over countless cases that ranged from minor offenses to life-altering decisions. He had seen it all: the fearful, the remorseful, the genuinely contrite. He had dealt with the young and the old, the rich and the poor, and had always been known for his compassion and understanding. But Olivia was different. She was not here out of fear or remorse. She was here because the consequences of her actions had caught up with her, and even then she seemed entirely unwilling to accept responsibility. Judge Caprio's gaze never wavered as he reviewed her case file. He already knew everything: the reckless driving, the dangerous disregard for the safety of others, and the attitude that had defined her every encounter with the law. His reputation for fairness was built on a foundation of empathy and understanding. But today he knew that the lesson Olivia needed wasn't one of leniency. This time she needed to be confronted with the full weight of her privilege and the reality that no amount of money or family connections would allow her to escape the consequences of her behavior. As the room grew quiet, the gravity of the situation seemed to finally settle in. Olivia's eyes flicked up from her phone for the first time, though the disinterest in her gaze was palpable. She was still convinced that her wealth and status would smooth things over. But Judge Caprio had already made his decision. He would give her a chance to show some sign of respect and maturity. If she didn't take it, he would make sure she understood that in his courtroom, privilege didn't matter. Accountability did. Olivia Hayes's attitude remained unchanged as the case proceeded. Despite Judge Caprio's calm but firm requests, she continued to act as though she were at a casual brunch rather than standing before the court for a serious violation. When asked to remove her sunglasses and put her phone away, Olivia complied, but only just. She slid the glasses down the bridge of her nose, then immediately pushed them back up. It was as if her compliance was nothing more than a begrudging acknowledgement that she had to follow the rules, but only just enough to avoid outright confrontation. Her phone, however, remained on the podium face up within arm's reach. It was clear that while she had technically obeyed the judge's orders, she still believed the rules did not apply to her in the same way they did to everyone else. "Can we just speed this up? I have a lunch reservation at noon," Olivia remarked dismissively, her voice dripping with the self-importance that had characterized her every word since she entered the courtroom. The gallery, once silent, now responded with quiet murmurs of disapproval. It was evident that Olivia's indifference to the proceedings was beginning to wear thin with everyone else in the room. Judge Caprio's patience, however, was far from exhausted. His voice remained measured, but the subtle firmness in his tone now revealed the resolve he had made to address this case with the seriousness it required. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight, "I requested that you remove your sunglasses completely and put your phone away completely. This hearing has my absolute undivided attention. It requires yours." At this, Olivia let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind that betrayed her growing irritation. She grabbed her sunglasses, tossing them into her Louis Vuitton bag with excessive force, her face scrunching up in a mock gesture of frustration. "Fine, let's just get this over with," she muttered under her breath. The eye roll she gave was so pronounced it was hard not to see it as a deliberate act of defiance. She still refused to put her phone away, leaving it face up, as if she could not bear the thought of being separated from it for even a moment. The courtroom, already tense, grew quieter still. The people in the gallery who had been quietly watching Olivia's display of arrogance were now openly disapproving. An elderly woman in the second row shook her head in disbelief while a middle-aged man crossed his arms, preparing for what he sensed would be a crucial moment in the courtroom drama. Even the court reporter, who had been dutifully typing up every word, paused, clearly taken aback by the sheer audacity of Olivia's behavior. As the case unfolded, Olivia's arrogance continued to show through. When Judge Caprio laid out the details of her reckless driving, her response was defensive and completely devoid of any self-awareness. "That kid was nowhere near my car," she snapped, as though her personal perspective was the only truth that mattered. She continued, "And everyone drives fast on that stretch of road. The speed limit should clearly be higher. Besides, I was running late for a photo shoot." The entire courtroom seemed to recoil at this statement. A child had nearly been struck by her vehicle, but Olivia's focus remained firmly on her own inconvenience. The silence in the room was palpable, and whispers of disbelief rippled through the gallery. "That could have been my son," a voice from the back of the room said, the raw emotion in her words resonating through the crowd. A few gasps were heard as the full weight of Olivia's words settled in. Judge Caprio's disappointment was now visible. His tone, while still calm, carried an edge of frustration as he addressed Olivia once more. "Miss Hayes, you came within a foot of killing that child. Do you truly comprehend the severity of traveling 80 miles per hour on a neighborhood street where children reside and play? Olivia's response was a mix of defensiveness and disregard. I'm an excellent driver. I've never actually hit anyone, she said, as if this was some sort of validation for her reckless behavior. That kid should have been on the sidewalk, not in the street. And honestly, if parents can't keep track of their kids, that's just not my concern. At this point, it became clear to everyone in the room that Olivia had no real understanding of the consequences of her actions. She still believed she was untouchable, that her wealth and her family's power could shield her from responsibility. Judge Caprio, now fully aware of her mindset, shifted his approach. Miss Hayes, this is your 7th traffic violation in just 2 years. Does this sound like a lapse in concentration or simply bad luck? Or does it reflect a deeper belief that the rules just don't apply to you? As Olivia continued to respond with dismissive excuses, Judge Caprio's patience began to wear thin. Olivia's flippant remarks, her refusal to acknowledge the gravity of her actions, and her total disregard for the impact her behavior had on others, solidified the judge's decision: leniency would not be an option. She needed to face the consequences of her actions, not just for the safety of others, but for her own growth. The turning point came suddenly as the courtroom held its breath in a rare silence. Olivia Hayes, still brimming with defiance, had become increasingly frustrated by Judge Caprio's unyielding approach. She was used to being able to talk her way out of anything, relying on her father's wealth and connections to smooth over her mistakes. But here in this courtroom, things were different. The weight of the law, uncompromising and indifferent to privilege, was beginning to crash down on her, and she had no way to escape it. Judge Caprio, after patiently listening to Olivia's continued excuses and justifications, finally decided to confront the full extent of her arrogance. His voice, which had previously been calm but firm, now held an unmistakable sharpness. Miss Hayes, I have given you every opportunity to show respect for this court, for the law, and for the people you have endangered. Instead, all I've heard from you are excuses. I've seen nothing but contempt from you, nothing but a refusal to take responsibility for your actions. Olivia, still holding on to the belief that her money could solve everything, shook her head in disbelief. I don't see what the big deal is. I'm a good driver. This is all just blown out of proportion. My dad will fix this like he always does, she said, her voice tinged with frustration, as if she were the victim of some misunderstanding. At this point, the gallery couldn't contain their collective anger anymore. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Olivia's comments were not just offensive, they were a direct insult to the very people who had witnessed and suffered the consequences of reckless driving. Unbelievable, someone in the back muttered loudly. She doesn't even get it. Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with undeniable authority. Miss Hayes, you think this can be solved with a phone call. You think that your father's wealth, his influence, and your social media following can erase the consequences of your actions. But in my courtroom, none of that matters. What matters is the law, and the law applies to everyone equally. No one is above it, not even you. The words hit Olivia like a punch to the gut. The realization began to sink in that she wasn't going to be able to talk her way out of this. The judge wasn't interested in her family's wealth or her reputation. He was interested in one thing: accountability. But even then, Olivia couldn't fully process the gravity of the situation. She scoffed. Whatever, I'm sure this is just going to be another fine. Maybe I'll be inconvenienced for a little while, but my dad's got it covered. This time, Judge Caprio didn't let her dismiss the matter so easily. His face, usually warm and patient, had hardened. He reached for a folder on his desk, one that Olivia had completely overlooked. I'd like to show you something, Miss Hayes, he said, his voice cold but measured. You see, in my courtroom, we deal in facts, not excuses. And the facts are, Miss Hayes, that you have a public record of your own actions which you thought were private. With a flick of his wrist, he signaled the court clerk to activate the monitor. The screen flickered to life, displaying an Instagram video from just a few days earlier. Olivia's face appeared on the screen, smiling as she filmed herself behind the wheel of her car. The camera panned down to the speedometer, clearly showing 90 miles per hour. Her voice echoed through the courtroom speakers. Daddy's lawyers are better than your laws. The gallery gasped in unison. Olivia's smile faltered, her face going pale as the reality of what she had posted came crashing down on her. She had thought it was a joke, a playful post to her 47,000 followers. But now, with the weight of those words fully visible to everyone in the room, she couldn't hide from the truth. Her own words were evidence against her. I didn't mean it like that. Olivia stammered, her earlier arrogance replaced by panic. It was just a joke. I didn't think anyone would take it seriously. Judge Caprio's eyes remained fixed on her. A joke. You were driving 90 mph on a public road, filming yourself with your phone and mocking the legal system, and you posted it for the entire world to see. His tone had softened, but only enough to ensure his words landed with full impact. That's your definition of humor. The second image appeared on the screen, a post from a few days before showing Olivia pouting in front of the courthouse. The caption read, "Ugh, traffic court. Adorable poor people trying to feel important." The image was accompanied by a laughing emoji mocking not only the court, but everyone who was there. The reactions from the gallery were explosive. People began to speak up, their anger boiling over. "She called us poor," a voice rang out from the back, filled with disbelief. "She's making fun of us." Before Olivia could defend herself, a third image flashed across the screen. This time a screenshot of a text conversation. Olivia's friend had written, "Another ticket. You're so wild." Olivia's reply was simple and chilling. "Laws are for poor people. My dad will make it disappear like always." It was at that moment that the full extent of Olivia's entitlement became painfully clear. She didn't just disregard the law, she actively mocked it. And now her own social media had sealed her fate. Judge Caprio, without missing a beat, turned to her father, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery, his face unreadable. "Mr. Hayes, it seems your daughter has a very clear view of the world. She believes she is above the law and that money can erase everything. But this court will not allow her to continue living in a bubble of privilege and entitlement." The silence in the courtroom was deafening as Judge Caprio's words settled in. Olivia Hayes, who had entered the courtroom expecting a quick dismissal of her reckless actions, now faced a reality she had never anticipated. Her confident smirk had long since vanished, replaced by the stark, pale look of someone who realized her world was crumbling around her. For the first time, she saw the full weight of her behavior reflected in the faces of those around her, faces that once held nothing but curiosity, and now looked at her with disdain and anger. Judge Caprio stood silently for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. Then he spoke with the quiet authority that had earned him respect across the legal community. "Miss Hayes." He began, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. "You have had every opportunity to show respect in this courtroom, to acknowledge the danger you've caused, and to understand the consequences of your actions. Instead, you have mocked this system and the lives it is meant to protect. You've shown nothing but contempt for the law and the people who serve it." Olivia sat frozen, her legs trembling beneath her as she fought to maintain her composure. She had never imagined a day when money, her father's influence, and her social media followers wouldn't be enough to make everything disappear. But today, in this courtroom, her wealth meant nothing. The law was not for sale. Judge Caprio continued, his words deliberate. "For reckless driving, traveling at 80 mph in a 35 mph zone, I'm imposing the maximum fine of $1,000. Olivia's eyes widened as the number sank in, but the judge wasn't finished. "For driving with an expired registration, another $500. For contempt of court, because your actions today have been nothing short of disrespectful to this courtroom and its authority, I'm imposing an additional $500. Olivia's face drained of color as the total added up in her mind. And Judge Caprio added, his voice hardening, "For your history of dangerous driving and prior violations, you will pay an additional $1,000 in court costs. Your total comes to $5,000 due immediately, with absolutely no payment plan available." The courtroom was alive with murmurs, and Olivia could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck. She had never seen such an amount of money, at least not something that she would have to pay herself. This wasn't a fine that could be erased with a check from her father's account. This was a cost that she would have to face head-on. But the punishment didn't stop there. Judge Caprio's eyes never left Olivia as he laid out the next part of her sentence. "Your driver's license will be suspended for 6 months, effective immediately. Not reduced, not delayed. 6 full months, and you will complete 80 hours of community service with the city's youth traffic safety program, where you will personally visit schools and explain to children why speeding is dangerous and why you stand before them today as an example of what not to do. At the mention of community service, Olivia's face twisted in disbelief. She had no interest in sitting down with children and explaining the consequences of her actions. Her life had always been one of privilege, and the idea of being forced to face the real world was a reality she had never truly considered. Judge Caprio continued, his tone unwavering. You will also attend a victim impact panel where you will listen to the stories of families who have lost loved ones to reckless driving. And you will write a 2,000-word essay on the necessity of traffic laws which you must submit to this court within 30 days. Olivia opened her mouth as though to protest, but the words died in her throat. She had been given no room to argue, no opportunity to escape the consequences of her behavior. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a lesson, one that would force her to confront everything she had taken for granted. The final condition was delivered with quiet but firm finality. Finally, you will delete the Instagram post mocking this legal system and replace it with a sincere public apology, or you will spend an additional 30 days in jail for contempt. The weight of the judgment was crushing. Olivia sat there stunned, her world completely unraveling in front of her. This was no longer about just paying a fine. This was about changing her worldview, understanding the reality of the system she had so callously mocked. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished with Olivia's father. Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice now addressing her father, who had been silently sitting in the back of the courtroom watching the devastating consequences of his long-standing protection of his daughter unfold. I'm formally ordering that these fines be paid exclusively from your daughter's own personal funds, not yours. If she doesn't have the liquid money, she can obtain a job and earn it. If she fails to pay the full amount within 90 days, a warrant will be issued for her arrest. Charles Hayes, a man who had always been able to solve problems with a check, now found himself facing a truth he could no longer ignore. The love he had shown his daughter by covering for her mistakes had only enabled her behavior. The cold realization that his money could no longer protect her was written on his face as he nodded solemnly, understanding the full gravity of the situation. Olivia turned to her father, desperation in her eyes. Dad, you're not actually going to let him do this to me, are you? Her father, his face a mixture of sorrow and resignation, met her gaze. Olivia, enough, he said, his voice low but firm. The judge is absolutely right. I failed you by constantly protecting you from the consequences of your choices. Starting today, that changes. You will pay these fines yourself. You will complete this community service yourself. And if you cannot handle that responsibility, then perhaps you will finally understand what growing up truly means. Olivia's face twisted with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Her final defense had just crumbled and her world had turned upside down. For the first time in her life, she was being held accountable, not by her father's wealth, not by her social media influence, but by the very system she had mocked for so long. It was a harsh reality, but it was one she would have to face. As the gavel fell, the courtroom was still. Olivia Hayes sat there stunned, her mind racing to process everything that had just transpired. The money, the status, the entitlement that had defined her existence, none of it mattered anymore. For the first time, she realized that the world she had built around herself, one of privilege and escape from responsibility, was crumbling. The system she had mocked so casually now had her in its grasp, and no amount of wealth or connections could shield her from the consequences of her reckless actions. In the weeks that followed, Olivia began to experience the weight of her sentence. Her driver's license was suspended, and for the first time she was forced to confront the reality of living without the luxury of being driven wherever she wanted. The community service, though humiliating at first, opened her eyes to the true consequences of reckless driving. She visited schools, speaking to children about the importance of obeying traffic laws, and slowly she began to understand the significance of the lesson Judge Caprio had tried to teach her. The very system she had once thought was beneath her now became the key to her growth. The Victim Impact Panel was another eye-opening experience. Listening to families who had lost loved ones to reckless drivers made her realize the profound impact her actions could have had on a child's family. The 2,000-word essay she had to write about traffic laws wasn't just an academic task. It became a reflection of her own responsibility, her personal growth, and the realization that the law existed not to control her, but to protect others, including herself. But perhaps the most important lesson came from the apology she was forced to post on Instagram. It wasn't just a simple act of humility, it was a public reckoning. For the first time, Olivia apologized, not just to the court, but to the thousands of people who had followed her, watched her make light of serious matters, and admired her for the wrong reasons. She deleted the mocking post and replaced it with a heartfelt apology acknowledging the harm she had caused. Judge Caprio's words echoed in her mind long after the courtroom had emptied. 5 years from now, you can look back on today as the worst day of your life, or the day that forced you to change. Olivia didn't yet know what the future held, but for the first time she understood that change was not just possible, it was necessary. The path ahead would be difficult. The consequences of her actions were clear, and the lessons she had learned were profound. But Olivia Hayes, for the first time in her life, faced the reality of personal responsibility, and with that realization, she found the possibility of growth.